Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday the 6th of February. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 348 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition, and then I will bring you today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Ukraine's Defence Minister, Alexei Reznikov, who is under pressure from a corruption scandal, is to be reshuffled into another government job. He will be replaced by Kyrylo Budanov, head of Ukraine's military intelligence. His position had been under threat after it emerged the Defence Ministry paid 2 or 3 times the supermarket price for food to supply troops on the front line. Ukraine is bracing for a possible Russian offensive this month, before the first anniversary of its invasion of Ukraine. Kyiv has the reserves to hold back Moscow's forces, even though the latest Western military supplies will not all arrive on time, Alexei Reznikov has said. Mr. Reznikov said that an attack would be for symbolic reasons. Russia is gradually stepping up its attacks and closing in on the eastern city of Bakhmut amid heavy fighting. Alexei Reznikov claimed that Moscow was losing 500 killed and wounded every day in Bakhmut. The UK Ministry of Defence said Bakhmut was becoming increasingly isolated in its latest intelligence assessment, which noted that Russia now had the 2 main roads into the city under threat from direct artillery fire, making it harder to supply the defending forces into the town. Iran and Russia are looking to build a factory in Russia that could supply more than 6,000 Iranian-designed drones for the war in Ukraine. That's according to reports in the Wall Street Journal. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov arrived in Iraq on Sunday for talks on energy and food security in view of the Ukraine conflict, an Iraqi Foreign Ministry spokesperson said. Lavrov will also visit Mali this week, in a trip that the West African country's government says will strengthen defence and security ties. The EU-imposed ban on Russian seaborne oil products came into force on today. The 27-nation bloc is banning Russian refined oil products, such as diesel fuel, and joining the US and other allies in imposing a price cap on sales to non-Western countries. A ban on Russian seaborne crude came into force on the 5th of December, and the extension to oil products means that 70% of Russian energy exports will now be subject to sanction. Oil products represent about a third of Russian oil exports. More than 2,600 people were killed when an earthquake struck central Turkey and northwest Syria, in one of the most powerful quakes in the region in at least a century, while a second powerful tremor hours later threatened to overwhelm the rescue efforts. Thousands more were injured as the quake wiped out entire sections of major cities in a region filled with millions of people who have fled the civil war in Syria. The magnitude 7.8 quake, which hit in the early darkness of a winter morning, was followed by a second 7.7 quake in the middle of the day today, as rescuers in both countries were still attempting to search for survivors. Turkish state broadcaster TRT showed images of panicked people sheltering in the street as buildings around them quaked during the aftershock in the town of Kahramanmaraş, north of Gaziantep. Turkey's Vice President, Fuat Oktay, said the death toll had surpassed 1,500 people in Turkey alone by the early evening. Una Sezer, who heads Turkey's disaster relief agency AFAD, said that at least 8,500 people were injured in the country's south. 130 aftershocks have been recorded after the earthquake. Nearly 15,000 search and rescue personnel have been deployed to the region, he said. In Syria, already wrecked by more than 11 years of civil war, the health ministry said more than 326 people had been killed and 1,042 injured. In the Syrian rebel-held northwest, rescuers said 147 people had died. The toll is expected to rise as rescue workers and residents search frantically for survivors under the rubble of crushed buildings in cities on both sides of the border. The quake struck at 4:17 local time, about 1:17 GMT, at a depth of about 18 kilometres near the Turkish city of Gaziantep, which is home to about 2 million people, according to the US Geological Survey. Television images from Turkey showed shocked people standing in the snow in their pyjamas, watching rescuers dig through the debris of damaged and destroyed homes. Buildings were levelled while many people were still asleep. Tremors were felt as far away as Lebanon, Greece, Israel, and the island of Cyprus. In the southern Turkish city of Gaziantep, about 150 miles from the border with Syria and 50 miles from the epicenter of the earthquake in Kahramanmaraş, people felt aftershocks hours later. Images from Gaziantep appeared to show that the earthquake caused the collapse of the city's historic castle, an ancient and imposing stone structure on top of a hill that was used as an observation point during Roman times. The head of Turkish Red Crescent, part of the International Red Cross, said it was mobilizing resources for the region and urged people to evacuate damaged homes. The head of Turkey's Disaster Management Agency said all capabilities of our state are mobilized, after the quake, warning civilians to keep communication to urgent texts only to help emergency services find survivors. Turkish television showed rescuers digging through the rubble of levelled buildings in Kahramanmaraş and neighbouring Gaziantep, where entire high-rise blocks were destroyed. A fire lit up the night sky in one image from Kahramanmaraş, although its origin remained unclear. Buildings also crumbled in the cities of Adıyaman, Malatya, and Diyarbakir, where people rushed onto the street in panic. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is under pressure to oversee an effective response to the disaster as the country heads towards an election on the 14th of May. Mr. Erdogan said search and rescue teams had already been dispatched to the affected areas. "We do not know how high the number of dead and injured will go. Our hope is to get through this disaster with the least loss," he said in a speech. "This is the biggest disaster we've experienced in the last century after the 1939 Erzincan earthquake," he added, citing an incident in which more than 32,000 people were killed in eastern Turkey. Downing Street has declined to rule out that the UK could withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights if it was seen as something needed to stop small boat crossings, despite serious misgivings amongst some Conservative MPs. Rishi Sunak's official spokesperson stressed that Number 10 was confident a promised new bill to try to limit the number of refugees and migrants arriving unofficially would comply with international treaties, but refused to say what might happen if the European Court opposed the plans. Other officials, however, said that even if withdrawal from the ECHR was considered, it would not happen in this Parliament. If eventually seen as needed, it would most likely first be included as a manifesto pledge for the next election. Any move to leave the ECHR would be deeply controversial, in part because its provisions form part of the Good Friday Peace Agreement, but also because it would leave the UK with Russia and Belarus as the only European nations outside the continent's joint rights framework. While a number of Conservative MPs would support withdrawing, citing local worries about the numbers arriving in the UK unofficially, such a plan would be vehemently opposed by others in the same party. Leaked messages last week in a Tory MP WhatsApp group showed that some Red Wall MPs were complaining that they would never be able to enact the policy of deporting refugees to Rwanda if the UK did not leave the ECHR, while others warned of a backlash. A senior Bank of England policymaker has warned the central bank could be forced to keep raising interest rates to prevent high levels of inflation from becoming entrenched in the UK economy. Catherine Mann, an independent economist on the bank's Rate-Setting Monetary Policy Committee, the MPC, said there were material upside risks to inflation sticking at higher levels than expected as the impact of the COVID pandemic, Russia's war in Ukraine, and Brexit weigh on the economy. In a speech in Budapest today, she said, The UK suffers not only from the COVID and energy shocks, but also the negative supply shock, the worst of all worlds. Catherine Mann, consistently the most hawkish member of the MPC, was outvoted by her colleagues last week as she pushed for a bigger rate increase than the 0.5 percentage point rise announced by the central bank. With the bank's base rate now at 4%, the highest level since 2008, she said further increases would still be required. We need to stay the course, and in my view, the next step in bank rate is still more likely to be another hike than a cut or a hold, she said. Her speech comes amid city speculation that the Bank of England is nearing the peak of its most aggressive tightening cycle in decades, after a modest fall in the headline inflation rate and as the economy teeters on the brink of recession. Financial markets expect one more 0.25 percentage point increase this year before Britain's worsening economic slowdown forces the bank to cut rates. Inflation has fallen back from more than 11% in October to 10.5% in December, with most economists forecasting a rapid decline this year as the initial surge in energy prices after the Russian invasion fades in significance for the annual inflation rate. However, Ms. Mann said there were risks inflation had so far stabilised at high levels, which is not yet the harbinger of a turning point towards a sustainable return to the 2% target set by the government for the bank to achieve. In addition to the COVID pandemic and the energy shock, she said Brexit was also affecting the British economy. The UK has also been affected by a third type of shock which makes it unique. No other country chose to unilaterally impose trade barriers on its closest trading partners, she said. EU and UK negotiators have made a breakthrough in reducing checks on goods moving between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, as part of efforts to resolve the long-running dispute over the Northern Irish Protocol. A senior EU official has said that an agreement on food and animal health checks was close to being done, as part of a deal that would create green and red lanes at Northern Irish ports to differentiate between goods staying in the region and those moving south to the EU's single market. Goods from Great Britain destined to stay in Northern Ireland would go through a green lane with lighter checks, although the precise nature of customs paperwork and food and animal health checks remains unclear. The deal would require the UK to meet EU requirements to prevent food and animals from Northern Ireland slipping into the EU's internal markets via the Irish land border. Food products would have to be labelled. UK authorities would have to undertake market surveillance to monitor and enforce food safety and animal welfare standards. Last month, the EU and UK struck a deal on real-time data sharing on goods moving across the Great Britain-Northern Ireland border that is regarded as critical for any reduction in checks on Northern Ireland-only goods. This latest development raises hopes of a broader agreement on the protocol, but the official cautioned that nothing has happened on other difficult issues, including the role of the European Court of Justice. The agreement on red and green lanes and links to food and animal standards was reported on Ireland's public broadcaster RTE today, following earlier reports of the breakthrough on customs checks. The SNP's leader Nicola Sturgeon has published her tax returns for the last 6 years. The documents, which were published on the SNP website today, show Ms Sturgeon has only one source of income, her salary as First Minister. While she is taxed on her full salary, she receives only the 2008-2009 value. This means that she donates about 20% of her salary entitlement back to the public purse. Ms Sturgeon said, "I previously committed to being open and transparent to the people of Scotland about my own earnings. Today's publication makes good on that commitment. These documents show clearly that my sole source of income is my job as First Minister, the office which I have immense privilege of holding. I hope other party leaders, including the Prime Minister, will follow suit in an effort to promote transparency in public office." A study has found that gardeners who use pesticides are contributing to the decline of songbirds in the UK. Scientists have urged people to stop spraying their gardens with poison in order to halt bird decline and adopt instead wildlife-friendly practices. The results of the University of Sussex study, which researchers call the first of its kind, published in the journal Science of the Total Environment, found that gardeners who use pesticides can expect to see fewer birds. The experiment, which surveyed 615 gardens in the UK, found 25% fewer house sparrows where glyphosate was used regularly. This is an ingredient found in commonly used herbicide brands such as Roundup and Gallup. Slug pellets also seem to have an impact on bird sightings. In gardens where metaldehyde slug pellets were used, house sparrow numbers were down by almost 40%. Researchers drew on data gathered by the British Trust for Ornithology, which organises Garden Birdwatch, a citizen science garden bird recording scheme, and found that 32% of respondents used pesticides on their gardens and that glyphosate-based herbicides made up 53% of those applications. Professor David Goulson of the School of Life Sciences at the University of Sussex said the UK has 22 million gardens, which collectively could be a fantastic refuge for wildlife, but not if they are overly tidy and sprayed with poisons. We just don't need pesticides in our gardens. Many towns around the world are now pesticide-free. We should simply ban the use of these poisons in urban areas, following the example of France. The Royal Horticultural Society, the UK's leading gardening charity, says the use of pesticides and herbicides should be avoided if possible, and they should only be used, if ever, in small and targeted applications. This research also found that those who adopted wildlife-friendly practices, such as planting native shrubs and flowers or digging a wildlife pond, saw more birds than those who did not. The Reverend Al Sharpton has warned that racially charged incidents such as the brutal death of Tyre Nichols in the US will also occur in the UK without far-reaching police reform. On the eve of a two-day visit to the UK, the US civil rights veteran said that systemic racism and a culture of policing that produces brutality must be addressed. Tyre Nichols, a 29-year-old father and black man, died in hospital 3 days after being pulled over and beaten by police officers in Memphis on the 7th of January. The Reverend Sharpton, the president of the National Action Network, who last week delivered the eulogy at Nichols' funeral, called for reforms of UK policing. The failure to address systemic racism in UK policing and the culture of policing that produces brutality against our people will only lead to more incidences like the tragedy of Tyre Nichols, he said in a statement. His comments contrast with Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, who in September last year said that initiatives on diversity and inclusion should not take precedence over common-sense policing. A damning UN report last month found that the government has failed to address structural, institutional and systemic racism against people of African descent in Britain. We have serious concerns about impunity and the failure to address racial disparities in the criminal justice system, deaths in police custody, joint enterprise convictions, and the dehumanising nature of the stop and strip search, the UN working group said in a statement. The Reverend Sharpton is expected to expand on his comments when he begins his visit to the UK today. He will address the Tyre Nichols death and the parallels with allegations against the police in the UK. Officials monitoring the smouldering wreckage of a train derailment in northeastern Ohio have warned hundreds of nearby residents to evacuate on Sunday night, saying a tanker wagon was at risk of a potential explosion that could launch deadly shrapnel as far as a mile. They warned of the potential of a catastrophic tanker failure after a drastic temperature change was observed in one rail wagon. According to a statement from the office of Ohio's Governor, Mike DeWine, teams were working to prevent an explosion at the scene in East Palestine. It did not specify what was in that wagon or whether it was among those that had been carrying hazardous materials. Authorities urged anyone within a 1-mile radius of the site to leave immediately. Many had, but local officials indicated that more than 500 residents had declined to evacuate, the statement said. Federal investigators had announced earlier on Sunday that a mechanical issue with a wagon axle caused the derailment near the Pennsylvania state line on Friday night. Michael Graham, a board member of the National Transportation Safety Board, said at a news conference that the three-member train crew received an alert about the mechanical defect shortly before the derailment, but said the board was still working to determine which rail wagon experienced the issue. About 50 wagons derailed in East Palestine as a train was carrying a variety of products from Madison, Illinois to Conway, Pennsylvania, the rail operator Norfolk Southern said. No injuries to crew, residents or first responders were reported. A derelict site, once central to the Clyde shipbuilding industry, will be transformed following a £2.4 million award from the low-carbon Vacant and Derelict Land Investment Programme. The Govan Graving docks were used for final painting and repair of vessels, but have lain empty for 40 years. The Scottish Government award to upgrade a riverside walkway and create green space by 2025 is intended to help attract business investment, reverse biodiversity loss and habitat decline, and to create a visitor attraction. Further restoration of the historic dockyard will see it used for repairing heritage vessels, while a footbridge linking the site to neighbouring visitor destinations including the Glasgow Science Centre is planned once private sector funding is secured. This is one of 15 transformational schemes sharing £10 million in 2023-24 from the programme. Other successful applications for projects include the creation of a community learning campus on the site of a former Midlothian colliery, decontamination and redevelopment of former military land at Cromarty Firth to enable the construction of 93 affordable homes, the reuse of vacant and derelict buildings in Fife as an employment and training hub for rural green jobs and apprenticeships, and the support for community-led food production in Clackmannanshire. The Community Wealth Minister, Tom Arthur, visited the Govan Graving Docks site to meet those behind the project. He said, the Vacant and Derelict Land Investment Programme helps attract private investment to locations which have lain dormant for years. It also supports low-carbon development, helping Scotland reach net zero by 2045 and to grow an economy that is greener, fairer and more prosperous. And officers are continuing to appeal for the public's help to trace an 11-year-old girl who has been reported missing in Galashiels. Caitlin Eason was last seen around 5:45 on Sunday at the interchange in the centre of the town. There is a possible further sighting of her walking alone on Melrose Road 10 minutes later, near to a local sports facility called the Queen's Centre, in the direction of her home address. There have been no other confirmed sightings of her since. Caitlin is described as being about 4 foot 11 inches tall, of slim build with long blonde hair. When she was last seen, she was wearing a white jumper, brown boots and brown trousers. A significant number of inquiries have been carried out since she was reported missing to police at 8:15 yesterday evening. The local police commander, Chief Superintendent Katrina Payton, said, "As time passes with no contact from Caitlin, we are very concerned for her well-being, and I'm appealing to anyone who has seen her or knows where she might be to call police immediately. We do not have any information at this time to suggest she has come to any harm, but it is important that we find her as soon as possible." Partner agencies, including the local mountain rescue team, are assisting with the search. There are officers in the area, so please approach any of them if you have any information or call Police Scotland on 101, quoting the reference number 3314 from Sunday the 5th of February 2023. Police Scotland have also set up a public portal where members of the public can send private CCTV or dashcam footage which could assist them with their efforts to trace Caitlin. And that is all that we have for you this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to continue to develop the station, and to make new programmes for you. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of raising £30,000 to enable us to pay the bills. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. And you can also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Please click on the wee bell. We will be back tomorrow evening at 7 with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please come back and join us then. But yesterday morning in 1941, the SS Politician ran aground to the northeast of Eriskay in the Western Isles. The vessel was loaded with a mixed cargo that included cotton, machetes, sweets, cutlery, bicycles, cigarettes, pineapple chunks and biscuits. In the fifth hold, there were 8 crates of Jamaican banknotes, which had a value of about £3 million. That's about £150 million in today's money. And alongside the cases of banknotes were 22,000 cases of Scotch whisky of various brands. The whisky had been moved from bonded warehouses in Leith and Glasgow that had been damaged by German bombing, and was being shipped to the US to raise hard currency for the war effort. The brands in the cargo manifest included the Antiquary, Hague Pinch, VVO Gold Bar, Ballantine's Amber Concave, White Horse, King's Ransom, Victoria Vat, Johnny Walker Red and Black labels, Mountain Dew, King William IV, Macallum's Perfection, King George IV, PD Special, Old Curio, and Spey Royal. At today's prices, that whisky would be worth more than £7 million. And as you probably know, much of the cargo was salvaged by local people. I'd like to thank everyone who's been watching this evening. I'm away, maybe for a wee dram, and to think about the then exciseman in Lochboisdale, Charles McCall, and also the people of Eriskay. Good health to the one who put the politician onto the rocks. I hope that you have a very peaceful evening. Bye-bye.